Hello, welcome to another episode of the David Watson podcast. Today I spoke with Jim and he observed, created, developed, he talks about it a lot better in his own words, a system based in science, an undeniable truth of how you can live and improve your life. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello for the second time. We were just started the podcast and I looked down and noticed it wasn't recording and had to stop. So I had just asked Jim a question about where do you start or how do we start? And you were just going to give us a sentence for context.
Right. Okay, well, thanks, David. I am the discoverer of hitherto unknown natural phenomena, which greatly aid in the understanding of people. Mm-hmm. From which I invented a revolutionary practical philosophic system called septemics and published it in the book Septemics, Hierarchies of Human Phenomena.
So how did you become the discoverer of this?
Okay. The story really begins when I was accepted into engineering school at the age of 16. Of course, at the time, I thought I would be engineering physical things such as airfoils, motors, electrons, and so forth. But by the time I had my bachelor's degree, it was clear to me that I wanted to engineer the human psyche because that is the area of greatest unknown and mystery, and more significantly, the area in which we as a race are failing miserably. 95% of the difficulties and problems in industrialized society are because people don't understand people, don't understand the wife, don't understand the father, don't understand the son, don't understand the boss, and so forth. This is why we routinely elect criminals and idiots to run our governments. So, to make a long story short, I had a long career as a human development engineer, using engineering principles one-on-one with hundreds of clients of every description. All of my clients improved as a result of our work together. But beyond that, as it went along, I became aware that I could predict the outcome of the session.
Okay.
So the client would not know anything about what I was doing, how I was doing it, or what I was thinking. And I would see certain phenomena, and then I would know that the result of this session was going to be some other phenomena that I knew. And as the decades rolled by, this just happened more and more and more. And every time it did, I made notes. Now, I never told anyone about this. I kept this entirely to myself. But every time this occurred, I would see that the client was at a specific level on a specific scale that I had previously observed. And as a result of our interaction, he would go to the next level up. Now, this happened thousands and thousands of times. Sometimes it happened 10 times in the same session. Every time this occurred, it verified my hypothesis. So by 1995, I had about 32 scales that I had collected just from direct observation. You have to understand, there's no theory of septemics. This was just me observing what was in front of my face and writing it down. Now, of course, this only made me better at what I did because I would know the outcome of the session over and over and over and over and over. So by 95, I had 32 scales of varying lengths that I knew were correct just from empirical observation. And also in 95, one day I was pondering a particular client, and I realized that that client was at a level on one of these scales that I had not previously observed. And it was obvious to me, as soon as I saw what it was, that where to insert it into that scale. And when I inserted this 7th level into the 6th level scale, it then manifested mathematically Now, just to step back for a minute for those of you who may not be math aficionados, the whole point of math is you start with a formula or an equation and you coax data out of it. That is what mathematicians do. That is how Einstein found E equals mc squared. Everybody in the math and physics community knows exactly what steps he took. So when all this data jumped out at me, that's essentially a mathematical function. In other words, I looked at this and I said, whoa, I have all this data now that just appeared. That's what happens in math. So having taken 26 semesters of math and loving every minute of it, I realized that I had found something. Because this scale, when it went to 7 levels, it became a plane of data, a body of data. It wasn't just a scale. When I saw that, I said, whoa, I found something. I don't know what this is, but whatever it is, it has to be natural law, because anything that has mathematics embedded in it, like, for example, the Fibonacci sequence, is natural law. So then I said, I wonder how many of these other scales that I've been developing are actually 7-level scales that had not been developed all the way, because you have to realize I wasn't developing anything.
Yeah.
I was just helping my clients making notes. So knowing what I was looking for, I inspected all these other scales, and in a short period of time, they all went to 7 levels, and as each one did, it manifested mathematically. So now I had 32 7-level scales that all have mathematics embedded in them. I said, this looks like a new subject to me. And my next thought was, this looks like something that could really help people. They could read this and it would illuminate them. And so then I thought, well, I could go from helping people by the hundreds, which is what I had been doing as a human development engineer, to helping people by the millions if I put this in a book and get it out so people can read it and use it.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to write a book. So the first draft of the book was finished in December of 95. And I sent it out in a transcript form to colleagues of mine, all of whom had graduate degrees in a variety of subjects. And in a short period of time, they all responded very positively. They all said something like, whoa, this is great, very enlightening. And all those responses from these very well-educated people who I knew were intelligent told me, okay, I've got something here. And I then spent the next 25 years of my life working on this book. Because you have to realize, first I had to discover the phenomena, and I pretty much told you already how that occurred. Although you have to realize it's kind of a bigger story than that.
Yeah. I mean, we've been talking for sort of 10 minutes. You can't just kind of, this is 20 years of work in 10 minutes. Right.
So I did find 3 more scales. So it went from 32 to 35 as I was writing the book. Then you have to realize that simply having the scales and the corresponding data is not enough to make a workable philosophic system. So you have to understand, as an engineer, and I am a dyed-in-the-wool engineer, on a personality level, that's who I am. I'm only interested in results and facts. That's why I was successful with my clients.
Yeah.
So to engineering, opinions and beliefs are utterly irrelevant. So I had to make something that would work all the time for everybody. That took 20 years, beginning in 1995. But the most time-consuming aspect of this was expressing this in a way that would make sense to the average reader, because my intent from the beginning was to share this with the people of Earth. So basically, I was able to create a system that will work for anyone who can read English reasonably well and wants to improve himself or others, which I calculate to be about 500 million people.
Right.
Okay. So that's sort of where this came from. Now, you have to realize that I told you the first draft went out in 95, right? And then I said, well, I have to write a book. And so I'd rewrite it and I would release it to colleagues, clients, students, and so forth. And I would get feedback and then I would rewrite it. So there were 6 or 7 rewrites. And every time I rewrote it, it got clearer and clearer for the user. So finally, after working on this for 25 years, I said, well, I'm not going to live forever. This works. I'm going to release it. And I published it. And that was 3.5 years ago. And I've been watching people use this now from the original version 28.5 years ago and get it. They get it. They look at this and they say, oh, yeah, I see this. It's like when you first see the Pythagorean theorem. Mm-hmm. You look at it, it's like a new thing. You say, oh, yeah, I see. This makes sense, and you've got it for life.
I think that's an engineering and mathematics pleasure, because I can look at Pythagorean's theorem and I've still no idea what that means. So
okay,
but I get the gist. It's when you see something, you can't unsee it.
Right, or it's like the periodic table of elements. You probably saw the first periodic table of elements when you were 12 or 13, right?
Yep.
And you probably looked at it and said, oh, yeah, this makes sense. Hydrogen's here, helium's here, and then number 3 is lithium, and then it goes down horizontally and vertically. And see?
Nope.
Didn't happen. Okay.
I think this is very interesting because you've already made a good point. You highlighted something when you were talking that you realize from an engineering perspective that the work needed to be done so that anybody could read it and understand it. And that's right. And I think this is a really good bridge that you and I have discovered quickly, that I am just not mathematical. When I look at a periodic table, like you're saying, you can see it horizontally, you can see it vertically, it means something to you. I didn't even know that's something I should be looking at, the horizontal and the vertical. To me, it's just letters, and I'm just like, nope, nothing. Right. And because I just think this is a really fantastic bridge we've discovered by accident, is that some of the difficulty that you may have come up against is how do you translate what you see in terms of engineering and maths to someone like me, so I can pick up this book, read it, and understand what the 35 scales mean, and how to translate that into the way that my brain works. And that's an incredible skill to have to hone and work on.
Right. And I can assure you, just from what I know of you already, looking at you, you would get this book. Okay? You're not going to have trouble with this book because I was very careful to not make the book mathematical.
Yeah.
Now, there are a couple of spots where, in order to explain the scale, I had to mention some math ideas, and I did, and I explained it. But you have to realize that I've been involved in education from the age of 3 all my life to this very moment. So I'm very good at explaining things to people. I've been working as a tutor since I was a teenager.
Yeah.
So I sort of know how to get things across to people. So I was very careful, and that's why I kept rewriting it, and selecting the correct word to explain the phenomena was a big step. So the way people experience this, it's like putting on your glasses and looking in the mirror. You see yourself clearly. If you don't have your glasses on, you see something, but it's not clear, or looking at another person. So each one of these 35 scales is like a lens that you can hold up either to view yourself or to view another person. It's like a conceptual lens. And it's not obscure, complicated, or difficult because it's natural law. So for example, to give you an analogy, Newton's 3 laws of motion are really the basis of physics.
Yeah.
And so we who study it, after you see the 3 laws of motion, to everybody in the physics and engineering and science community, you've got it. You see, it's like you can't not have it. It becomes almost like common sense. It can't not be true. And that's how these scales are. Once you look at the scale, you say, oh, yeah, this is how this manifests. So, for example, you have a certain area of life, right? And that I have parsed it into 7 levels. So, for example, if you take motivation, there are 7 basic human motivations. All the others are subsets. So if I were to go out here on the street and stop some guy and say, what are your wife's motivations toward you, or motivation toward you? He would say, how can I know that? There are thousands and thousands. And I'd say, no, there are only 7. Look at this. And he would look at it and he'd say, oh, well, now that you put it this way, I can see she's here. So you're only selecting from 7. And let me tell you something else that makes this even easier, because I've been watching this for 28 and a half years. Somebody looks at the scale for the first time, never seen it before, doesn't know anything about it. I'm sorry, I'm getting a call. Okay. I don't know if it's messing up anything, but
no, I'm good.
I don't know what I can do about it. So I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. I was distracted.
You were just saying that there's 7 types of motivation.
Okay, good. Okay, so a person will look at it, and what will happen is, in seconds, I'm talking about 20, 25, 30 seconds, he will find a bracket, right? At first blush, he will look at it and say, well, I can see right away I'm not a level 1, 2, or 3 because I'm not doing so well in this area on any scale, you see? So he's got it down to 4, 5, 6, or 7. That's progress. And then you say to him, well, read the text, and then you can get it exactly. So he reads the text, you can help him like a tutor, and then he comes back and says, well, now that I read it, I can see I'm at level 5. That's not so great. No wonder I'm having trouble with this.
Yeah.
So this is very user-friendly because it's natural law. It's not counterintuitive.
So you could almost, for a visual, I'm just thinking like a little bit sideways in a visual sense, that this is almost like looking at a furniture shop full of flat packs, and this book will give you the step-by-step guide of how to build your life. Do you know what I mean? Right. So it's just like, these are the instructions. You've got to figure out where you are. And once you've figured out where you are, that's the next step ladder to the next stage. So you can go up the scales. And,
that's right.
You know. So,
right. Right. So now let me tell you just a little general information to put all this in a context that will help your listeners. Systemics is a philosophical science based on the fact that many human phenomena occur in a sequence of 7 levels. Literally, the word septemics means although pertaining to 7. Septemics comprises a collection of scales or sequences, each of which breaks down various human phenomena into a hierarchy of 7 steps. There are 35 such scales, each of which is unique. And together they span the spectrum of human experience, by which I mean any problem, dilemma, situation, difficulty that any person has can successfully be analyzed by one or more of these scales, usually more than one, if it's related to human beings. It's not going to tell you how to fix the engine of your car, because that's not human phenomena. But anything about people, why can't I get along with my wife? Why doesn't my boss like me? What am I going to do about my son? Anything like that. This is universally applicable. So you find the area that seems relevant, and you find either yourself or another person at the correct level, then you know exactly what they're going on. Okay? So now let me just tell you in a concise way, without talking about specifics, how this is helpful to people. Mm-hmm. I wrote this book to help people. I've had a lifetime of helping people. Each of these 35 scales provides the user with an infallible way of determining the salutariness or the beneficialness of any group, individual, or activity. If the group individual activity moves persons up the scale, it's beneficial or positive. If it moves them down, it's detrimental or negative. So I'm giving you a yardstick by which to measure human phenomena, which is an entirely new concept. More importantly, just finding out what level you or another person is at on any scale is by itself inherently enlightening and beneficial. Every time you correctly find a level, you have a realization. You say, oh, Joe is at level 5. No wonder he does that. So that is one of the ways that you know you found the right level. It leads you to a realization. In other words, you have an insight into what's going on in this area of your life.
So,
and finally, let me just finish. Yeah. Finally, once you know the correct level of a person, whether it's yourself or another, you can improve that person by moving them up to the next level up. I have solved the gradient problem that has bedeviled mankind for 6,000 years. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Most people have problems, difficulties, situations, dilemmas. They don't know how to solve them. 99% of the time, the reason they don't know how to solve them is because they don't know the gradient.
Okay.
So every good teacher, counselor, facilitator, therapist in the world understands that human development must be done on a gradient. You can't make an Olympic athlete out of a couch potato. Can't be done. There are too many intervening levels. But you find the person at the level he's at and you move him to the next level up. So what this does is it focuses your attention on the next level up. And because it's the next level up, if you make an effort, you will get there. Now look, if you're at level 4 and you try to get to level 1 or 2, you will fail because it's too steep a gradient.
Yeah.
But if you try to get to level 3, you will succeed because it is the next thing up. So this is...
So it's you would describe it as a steps-by-step guide?
Yes.
And how would, say, I was just looking for it so I could find it on Amazon. How would you... I'm trying to think. So, and again, I'm just trying to keep it in real layman's terms for everybody to digest. So it's a philosophical process based on your experiences dealing with people with your background as an engineer and maths. Is that correct?
Not exactly. Okay. It's a philosophical science. The data is what it is. Just like the acceleration of gravity at the surface of Earth is about 10 meters per second, okay? It's been measured probably millions of times. If you want to go out and calculate it yourself, you can. It's not hard. I'll give you the formula. All you need is a golf ball and a stopwatch. And you're going to get something very close to 10 meters per second. That's what it is, okay? Now, if you disagree with that, you're wrong. It is a scientific fact. Yeah. It's like people who say that the Earth is flat. They're wrong, okay?
Yeah.
We have photographs of the Earth. And if you understand physical science, which I do, it's impossible for the Earth to be flat. It's just absurd. Okay, so that is what this is like. I know from a lifetime of observation that these scales are correct. Now, you can ignore them if you wish, but it's much smarter to take advantage because this will facilitate your success.
So, would you describe it? And again, I don't mean specifically, I mean in a very broad term. Would you describe it first off as a self-help book, a coaching manual, or like, do you know what I mean? What category would you put it in terms of Is it a coaching manual? Is it a psychology manual? Is it a self-help book? Because there's skills in this that you must utilize from reading this book, that you must utilize for self-observation to realize where you are in your life and what you can do to be better. Is that correct?
Well, or improve your situation.
Yeah, improve your situation. So, but yours seems to be, there's the science behind why it works and how it happens.
So let me try to answer your question about this book. This is a textbook on an entirely new subject.
Yes.
I tried for years to fit this in the context of some pre-existing niche. It cannot be done. It's like trying to get an elephant into a Volkswagen. This is an entirely new subject, and that's why I'm talking to you.
Yeah, of course.
Because it's hard to get people to look at something that's entirely new. Most people live in a box and are comfortable in that box.
Yes.
Or they're afraid to get out of the box. This is out of the box.
So what I'm trying to bridge is, because I think what you're talking about is fantastic and both fascinating, because I do genuinely believe, although I haven't read your book, I do genuinely believe there are principles in this world that allow you to navigate the world. And
yes.
And any way that somebody can break them down to make them accessible and tangible for an everyday person that's walking down the street is something I'm all for promoting. But it's bridging that gap between this is somebody's pain point and this is how the book is the painkiller to get rid of the headache. Did you know what I mean? Because people, whether we like it or not, you and I can have probably a very enjoyable, in-depth conversation about the engineering behind this and how it predicts what happens and how you can learn to navigate it. Whereas some of my audience would be, I want the fast food menu, please. I just want to order that. So, because there's, when I was reading some of the stuff about it, and I'm somebody that when I do these podcasts, I try not to learn too much about you, because I rely on a curiosity of not knowing who I'm going to speak to. Because I don't know where I learned that. I just observed one day when I started doing these that I was at my best when I don't know a huge amount. Like, obviously, I looked at your website, I checked your bio, but it's like, okay, that gives me an idea. Now stop digging. So I have purchased the book, but I've literally did it before we started talking. Because it's like, I don't want to read the book beforehand, because then why do I need to talk to you? And I mean, obviously there would always be a good reason to talk to you, but my kind of, what I rely on is the fear of not knowing who you are, and how do I discover that and listen to you to talk about that. And so for me, for someone else, that kind of sitting on the edge of your seat, going in there completely unprepared, wouldn't work for them. But I discovered that's exactly what works for me, because it really makes me focus on listening to you.
Right.
And so what I'm trying to do is help everybody listen. Like, whilst there's no category that does the book a justice, what would they see it as being familiar to? So, self-help books might be clumsy in the sense it doesn't do it any justice and it's the wrong category, but studying the principles of your book and putting them into practice, does that help somebody's life improve?
Absolutely.
Right.
Let me try to address your issue in this way. Try to remember what your life was like before you ever studied physics, before you ever learned chemistry, before you ever studied biology, before you ever learned geometry. You were a different person. So after you learn these things, you have a perspective. That is why we have universal education, because we want our kids to know these things. Okay? So knowing geometry affects your whole life. It affects the way you think, and it affects how you drive a car. So all of these subjects had, like, before you knew history, like you probably know quite a bit of the history of the UK.
Yeah.
Well, before you knew that, you didn't know what was going on. And then you learned about these various kings. You learned about the Magna Carta. You learned about Disraeli and Churchill, and you have a context now.
Yeah.
And so when you look at the UK, you will have an idea what's going on. You see? Somebody who has never studied the history of England has no idea what's going on. Oh, who's this Churchill guy? Was he a king? They have no clue. So this gives you a clue about your life and the people around you. Now, let me give you one sentence to bring all of this into focus. The data in this book are vital for every person and can help you to achieve your goals faster and easier by explaining what might otherwise seem to be inexplicable or random.
Yeah.
So if you talk to most guys, they'll tell you that they don't understand women.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay, right? So you have a guy, he's got a girlfriend, he likes her, but he doesn't understand what's going on, doesn't understand why she does things, he doesn't understand he's just confused, right? If he takes this book and analyzes her across these 35 scales, he will understand her better than she understands herself. He'll say, now I see why she did this or that.
Yeah.
Well, so let me give you an analogy to really explain this. You might want to invite me to your home to look at your garden. I don't even know if you have a garden, but if you do, you might say, Jim, come and look at my garden. He says, okay, Dave. I come over and we go into your garden and I say, he's got hydrangeas, tulips, roses, irises, forget-me-nots, peonies. Now, the reason I can analyze it like that is I know a lot about flowers.
Yeah.
I've been involved in gardening my whole life. If you bring some 5-year-old kid into your garden, he's going to see and smell exactly the same thing. But all he can say is, these are pretty and they smell nice.
Yeah.
That's all he knows. Now, most people, and I'm talking about adults, okay, are like that little kid regarding human beings. They don't know what they're looking at. That is why more than 50% of the marriages in the United States end in divorce.
Yeah.
Yeah. So look, when I was a young man, I hadn't figured this out. I hadn't discovered this. So I didn't have it. And I made the same stupid mistakes that everybody else makes. And I got involved with people that I know now, because I know this material, I should never have been involved in. Now, for me, that does not happen, cannot happen, will not happen. And I'll give you a relevant example. About 2 months ago, I'm a single guy. I bumped into a beautiful blonde, gorgeous blonde, who was very interested in me, right? So now we're interacting the usual, where do you work, and where do you live, blah, 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 all that stuff, right? So as we're communicating over several different periods of time, I started to notice, she's low on this scale. 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 What, am I crazy? I dismissed her. I said, no thanks. I'm moving on. She was shocked. I was probably the first guy in her life who ever did that to her. Most guys would have jumped in head first and regretted it later. But I know Septemex. And I'll tell you something funny. When I told her that, I said, don't want to see you anymore, goodbye. She said, who do you think you are? I did not say the truthful answer, which is, I'm the guy who knows Septemex.
Yeah.
Because she wouldn't know what I was talking about. But that's how useful this is, okay? So now let me give you a scenario in general how you can use this. Let's say you have a pal, your pal John, and every time you see him, he complains to you about his relationship. Oh, I don't know what I'm going to do with my girlfriend. She's driving me crazy. She yells at me. She is demanding. She's fooling around with another guy. She's smoking dope. I don't know what to do, right? So you get tired of listening to this after 6 months and you say, John, come here, let me show you something. And you open up the book to the scale of relationships and you put it in front of his face. Now he looks at it and he says, you mean there's a scale of relationships? You say, yes. This relationship that you've been complaining to me about for 6 months, where is it on this scale? I guarantee you he's going to want to know that because you're opening the door for him. So he's going to look at it in maybe 20, 30 seconds. He's going to say, well, I can see right away. It's definitely not 1 or 2 because that's the top of the scale. We're having a lot of trouble. See? And it's definitely not 6 or 7. We're not like that. So it's got to be maybe 3, 4, 5. You say, okay, great. Go ahead and read the text and then you can get it exactly. So he does. You help him. And he comes back and he says, well, now I can see. We're at level 4. Okay, that's more near the bottom than the top, but it kind of explains why we're having some trouble. See, he has a realization. And then you say, you can move this relationship up to level 3. You can? Yes, it tells you in the book how to do that. But before we get into that, let me show you something else. And you open the book to the scale of sexuality, right? Different scale that's still relevant to this dilemma he has, right? And you say, you don't have to tell me if you don't want, but for your own illumination, where are you on the scale? He's going to say, you mean there's a scale of sexuality? I never heard of this. You say, yeah. Where are you on it? And right away, he's going to say something like, well, definitely not 6 or 7. That has nothing to do with me. And 1 or 2, I don't even understand. So it's maybe 3, 4, or 5. And you say, well, go ahead and read it. And then you can get it exactly. So he reads it. He comes back and he says, oh, I see. I'm at level 4. But I can also see that Gertrude is at level 5. No wonder we're having trouble. Those are incompatible levels. If you look at that scale, it's patently obvious that some of these scales are incompatible. And that's why sometimes you find a couple, they're good looking, smart, affectionate, they like one another, and their relationship does not work. Very often, probably a majority of the time, it's because they have conflicting levels on this scale. So this is the type of couple that can get a divorce and stay friends because they like one another. They're smart people, you see?
Yeah.
But they couldn't work out their marriage because of this conflict. Now, there's a couple of ways this can go. John can say, let me borrow this book. I'm going to show this to Gertrude and fix this up. See? But he might not do that. He might say, oh, I'm not going to mess with this woman anymore. This is a train wreck. I'm done. That's up to him. That's not up to us. Now, in the second scenario where he says, I'm done with her, you might think he would be bummed out by that. And that is not true. No matter what level you find, you're always happy because it's the truth. You have an epiphany. And when you have a realization, you say, now I see what's going on. That is a pleasant experience. See? Even if he realizes, I shouldn't be with this woman. She doesn't deserve my time. You see? He breaks off with her. That's fine. Now he knows what he's talking about. And when he looks for the next partner, he has some data to help him evaluate the person. So he's not going to make that same mistake again, probably, if he studies the book. Okay? So now I could keep doing this, what I've been doing for the last 5 minutes, on 8 or 10 or 12 or 15 different scales. Because in a relationship, it's complicated. There's a lot going on in human dynamics, okay? How does the person handle control? How does the person handle attack? How does the person handle motivation? In other words, all these factors are going to be relevant. So this guy could take this book and analyze the situation by 15 different axes. And by the time he finishes that, he's going to understand the whole thing. Now, whether he decides to go on and fix it, usually using the book, or say, up to hell with this, I'm not doing this anymore, that's up to him. Either way, he's better off. He'll say, Dave, thank you for saving me. I dodged the bullet. All right, so let me give you another example. Let's say you have a couple that's been going out for 2 years and they're talking about getting married, right? Wouldn't it be smart for that guy to ask himself, I wonder why this woman wants to marry me. I mean, isn't that a reasonable question? I'm not saying he should ask her that. I'm saying just inspect it himself, right? Well, we're talking about motivation, aren't we? So you look at the scale of motivation. It has 7 levels. Now, maybe when he looks at it, he knows her. He's been hanging out with her for 2 years. And once he looks at the book, he says, oh, I can see she's at level 1. That's love. That's the highest motivation of all. And he says, okay, that's a good reason to get married. But that might not happen. Maybe he'll say, now that I look at this, I'm realizing that she wants to marry me because I drive a Lamborghini. I have a 60-foot yacht. I fly my own Learjet. I live in a $10 million condo, and I have $15 million in the bank. That's a different motivation. That's level 4, which is money.
Yeah.
Now, again, he might look at that and say, well, she's money motivated, but you know what? I love this girl, so I'm going to marry her anyway. He could do that. Or he might say, I don't want to marry a gold digger. I want to marry somebody who loves me for myself. See? So we don't know what he's going to do with it. But either way, he's going to be better off because he understands the situation. Now, he might dump her because he doesn't want to marry a gold digger. But you might have another guy who says, fine, I'll marry a gold digger. Now, have you ever noticed how many rich, elderly, ugly men have beautiful young wives?
Of course.
Yeah. How does that work? I would often look at this and say, how can this be? This guy is ugly. He's out of shape. He's gray. Why would this 23-year-old beauty queen want to be with this guy? Well, I'll tell you how it works. The beauty queen gets a mink coat, a diamond ring, a pearl necklace, a Corvette, and a credit card. And the guy gets a 23-year-old beauty queen for a wife.
Yeah.
That's how it works. So she comes to him and says, honey, I want to go to Vegas for the weekend. He says, okay, here's $5,000, have a good time. And she's grateful. When she comes back, he gets rewarded. So for him, it works. See? So it depends on the situation. So this is not about judgment. I'm not saying...
No, this is... like you said, this is, the reason I described it earlier as, or attempted to describe it earlier as an instruction manual along the lines of sort of flat pack furniture is because you can go to the, you can look at it as if it's a shop window to pick the version of yourself you want to try and achieve. But you have to read the instructions to see where you are.
Right.
And once you've discovered where you are and what you can work on, and what you can do to go up the scales, you can then build this person you want to be.
Right. Or it could be somebody else that you want to help. Most people have kids, and most kids have trouble in school. So dad sees that Junior is having trouble in school. See, but he's got this book. He says, Junior, come here, let me show you this. And he opens it up to the scale of scholarship. Junior, let's say Junior's 12, so he can read the book. He looks at it and says, scale of scholarship? I never heard of this before. Well, he knows he's a scholar. So dad says, yeah, where are you on this scale? He's going to want to know that. He's going to look at it and say, well, right away, I can see I'm definitely not 1, 2, or 3. That's way over my head. So, and it's not 6 or 7. That's got to be 4 or 5. So dad says, okay, go ahead and read it. Read the text. It doesn't take that long, and then you can get it exactly. So he reads it, he comes back and says, well, now I can see I'm at level 5. No wonder I'm having trouble. That's near the bottom of the scale. And the dad says, well, we can help you move up to level 4. I tell you in that chapter with specificity how to make a better scholar. There's no mystery about this. It's like a cookbook, okay? So dad takes the kid, he follows the instructions, says, do this, do that. And now, 6 months later, instead of getting C's and D's, he's getting B's and C's. And this was all done without spending any money, without hiring a tutor, without sending him to remedial class, et cetera, et cetera. See, it's all very user-friendly. It's very congenial.
So, I just want to go back to, before. So you started writing the first draft in 1995, is that correct?
That's right.
So when did you start your role in observing people, and what specifically were
Okay.
you?
Well, while I was an undergraduate, by then I was so well educated because I was an honor student at and a scholarship student at very good schools.
Mm-hmm.
I was so well educated. I kind of knew what was in the mainstream by then. I knew all the main subjects. I knew math, I knew history, I knew chemistry, I knew physics, I knew biology, I knew psychology, I knew all these things. But what I always saw was huge gaping holes in between all of this, where there are, as far as human beings, most of it is unexplained. There's no explanation. How do you explain this? See, like for example, Jesus of Nazareth was at level 1 on the scale of basic purposes. That's not subtle once you know this material. That explains a lot. I know what his basic purpose was. I know what he was trying to do. The Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, was at the same level, different religion, but at the same level, you see?
Yeah.
So I was seeing all these gaps and holes. These people are not telling me. How do you explain this? How do you explain Napoleon? How do you explain Einstein? Because when I would look at these people, I'd say, okay, so this guy's a genius. He gave us a theory of relativity, 2 theories of relativity. Why did he get it? What's the deal here? How did this happen? So I started studying alternative subjects that are out of the mainstream. While I was 19, okay, in college. And you have to realize I was such a scholarly person, I could handle an 18 credit load and still study other things.
Yeah.
Because I loved it. So on the weekend, I go and I take courses in these other things. So by the time I was 20, I was working with people one-on-one using these various systems and technologies that I had learned about.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying is I want to get back before. So there must have been a point where you were either studying people and you saw these kind of, like you described it earlier, when you looked at a periodic table and you just understood what it meant, right? So you must have like studied these people or been observing people as you were doing one-to-one, and you were like, there's a pattern here for everybody.
Yeah.
I'm noticing it. So then the system must have started its development phase. Or did you see something first and like start a development phase of the system and then try it with people?
Well, let me tell you this about me that will explain something. I was an avid reader. I do all my homework and then I would sit down and read a book. Now, starting from about age 10 to about age 15, I read biographies of most of the great men of Earth. Pasteur, Lincoln, Jefferson, Oliver Cromwell, all these people, see? And because I wanted to know, what's the deal with these people, see? Like General Grant. General Grant is a very interesting person. Kind of an obscure person, didn't do well, wound up president of the United States, a beloved president of the United States. So I was already sort of looking into this and paying attention to this and trying to figure this out. And I was always sort of cognizant of, well, how does that work? How did Jesus put his hand on the man's eyes and the scales fell off his eyes and he could then see? What did he do? Cure his cataracts? See? So I wanted to know. And so as I studied all these subjects, little bits and pieces of this became clear to me. But there are always these places in the middle. So when I started working with clients, I was observing the person with the desire to help this person. Okay, you have trouble with your finances. Tell me about this, see? And by the time at the end of the session, the guy would have some realizations what he was doing wrong, see? And I just got better and better and better and better and better at this. Yeah. And after I became a professional, then I was using engineering principles. So what I did is, basically, I used Socratic dialogue aided by biofeedback. I have a very sophisticated understanding of biofeedback. In case you don't know, every time you think a thought, the electromagnetic field around your body changes.
Yes.
And this is easy to measure on a simple ohm meter. The resistance of your body changes when you think a thought.
Back up. What's Socratic
dialogue?
What's that?
Yeah. Okay. Socrates is the most important and famous personage in Greek philosophy.
Yeah.
So much so that they have pre-Socratic philosophy and post-Socratic philosophy. Okay? He was the central figure. His student Plato wrote a whole series of stories, I guess you call them, called the Socratic dialogues. Now, in each of these, it shows Socrates, his teacher, talking to a person or maybe two people,
right,
in such a way as to elicit a realization from the person. So he'd say to the person, "What's ethical?" And the person would struggle, see? And he would come to, and then when he would say something, he said, well, what about this? See? And the guy would say, oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. Well, okay, now you've thought about it, what's ethical? See? And he would lead these persons, and of course the reader with him, to realizations. See? Now, that's been around 2,500 years, read all over the world in translation, including by me. So that's essentially what I'm doing. I could look at the person, and as I got this data, with great precision, ask the right question.
Right.
And it was aided by biofeedback. And let me tell you what I mean by that.
Yep.
So when a person comes into me, I do a long interview. There's no charge for that. I just say, all right, tell me about your job, tell me about your wife, tell me about your mother, tell me about your, et cetera. Somebody's knocking at my door, I'm going to ignore it. So the guy tells me, now when he's doing this, I have him on the meter, biofeedback meter, right? And I see he gets certain reactions. So for example, I say, how do you feel about your mother? And the meter goes boom on the word mother. And then he says, well, my mother, boom, was not a good mother. Boom. I'm getting a read on mother, you see? So then when I get him in session, I'm going to say, tell me about your mother. And the meter goes boom.
Yeah.
Okay. So somebody's still knocking at my door. I don't know.
You can answer it if you want, because I'll just edit it
out. No, I'm
not
going to answer it. Okay. Not going to answer it. I didn't invite anybody over. So then I happen to know that different human phenomena give different reactions on the biofeedback meter. So if he's upset about his mother, he's going to get this reaction. If he's worried about his mother, he's going to get this reaction. If he's angry at his mother, he's going to get this reaction. If he has a secret from his mother, he's going to get this. And I know what those reactions are. So as he's talking to me, I'm seeing this specific reaction. So I'm saying, oh, this guy's upset about his mother. And I'll say to him, did your mother upset you? Right? Mm-hmm. And the meter goes, kaboom. Yes. Tell me about it. Now we're really getting into his subconscious because he's got some traumatic thing there, see? And he tells me about it. And when it's released, the meter tells me. Because there's a manifestation. Oh, he says, yeah, I realized that. Blah, 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 blah. And I say, okay, good, let's go to the next thing. And he's happy with it. So that's sort of how I use Socratic dialogue with biofeedback as a human development engineer. So this is because of my understanding of the human body, the human brain, all the human phenomena, electronics, all of that. You know, this is all electrical engineering stuff goes in there. And combined with my understanding of people from all of my studies of philosophy and theology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So
would it be fair to say then that when you started kind of, and this is very crude and I apologize, but when you started putting two and two together whilst working one-to-one with people, and you were able to sort of like recognize the different scales that and then implement them with people, you saw an acceleration of how they improved and the direction they went.
Right. So as I was working with people using this engineering approach, I just started to observe, as I said earlier, that I could predict the outcome of the session. I mean, sometimes I could predict even before I got the person in session. For example, I'd have a couple come to me, right? And the wife would say, I'd like to work with you. Okay. And I would know right then she was going to divorce this guy. I would know. Just from seeing them together, what you had to say. This was not mysterious to me. See, yeah. I didn't tell anybody that. I would never tell that to anybody. So she'd work with me, right? She'd say, thank you, Jim, that was great. And then 6 months later, she writes and says, I divorced Fred. Well, I was waiting for that shoe to drop, So that is the whole point of septemics, you see, because once you can analyze people, now somebody's knocking on my window. I have no idea who this guy is.
Do you want to just go and speak to him? I'll just hold here for a second.
No, I don't know who he is. And I see a policeman out there. Okay. Give me a second.
Yeah.
The thing is here, because I'm a polymathic scholar, I was able to recognize this for what it was. Now, there is an old datum in engineering. It's at least 100 years old, maybe older than that. That says 90% of finding the right answer is asking the right question.
Yes.
So you look at Newton's 3 laws of motion, right? To us, it's like, well, duh. In other words, they seem self-evident. But nobody figured them out before Newton. Yeah. You know why? He asked the right question. There's this famous story about he saw the apple fall from the tree, and he realized that the force pulling that apple from the tree is the same force that kept the moon in the orbit around the Earth. He said, oh, I see what's going on here. See?
Yeah.
Similarly, Einstein. Why did Einstein come up with the theory of relativity? Okay, it has completely revolutionized physics. The whole way that I think about the world is filtered through Einsteinian physics now. So it's revolutionary. Well, why did he figure it out and nobody else did for 6,000 years? He asked the right question. Or Fibonacci. You can get a flower and you count the seeds one way and you get one Fibonacci number. You count them the other way, you get another Fibonacci number. Well, what's going on there? Or how about a pine cone? It's the same thing. You can count it one way, you get one number, count it the other way, you get another. So there were these numbers in nature, and Fibonacci, a brilliant mathematician, said, something is going on here with these numbers. These are naturally occurring. These creatures don't know anything about math. How do they do this? So he eventually reverse engineered it. In other words, he worked backwards from the numbers that he had, and he figured out the formula, and he wrote it down and gave it to us. So we now know the formula for Fibonacci numbers, and we know them to infinity. We can calculate them to infinity. So why? Because he was inquisitive, and he had a mathematical mind, and he said, there's something going on here with these plants and these shells and things that all have these numbers in them, and he figured it out. That's exactly the same process that I used in figuring this out, where I looked at it and I said, there's something here. So I made notes. See, I didn't discuss it. And as I said, every time this happened in a session, it verified my hypothesis. Now, I worked with people off and on for 40 years. So you have to realize, thousands and thousands of times this was verified. They did not know anything about this. So I knew these were correct, but the best way of knowing these were correct is this. So I would observe this phenomenon in this session, right? I'd write it down. And then I would go out into the world. And I would see it in the world right in front of my face. Like I would see some guy, This guy's at level 5 on the scale of choice. So, for example, I know the basic purpose of every president of the United States, going as far back as Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And many of the presidents previous to that who I studied, such as Lincoln and Jefferson and Washington. Okay? This is not a guess. It's not an opinion. It's like looking at a tulip and knowing it's a tulip. Yeah. Now, every tulip in the universe is unique, but I can always tell a tulip when I see it. Mm-hmm. Yes, this tulip is different from this tulip, but it's still a tulip, and I can spot it. So a tulip is completely different from a rose. It has a whole different dynamic to it. It grows from a bulb right out of the ground. Roses are completely different. So it's like I compare this subject to botany or astronomy. It's a descriptive science. So the stars are there, okay? And we have guys who study them, and they use physics and math to make calculations, observations, and they observe things and they test them. And so our body of the universe grows, right? That's the same thing that I did. It's a descriptive science. These phenomena are there. I know that these scales are correct the same way I know that the 3 laws of motion are correct. The same way I know that the laws of thermodynamics are correct.
Yeah.
The same way I know that the Fibonacci sequence is correct. I studied it. It's not an opinion. Okay? I am a fact-driven person. People can have whatever beliefs or opinions they want. It's none of my business. But don't tell me that the Pythagorean theorem is wrong. If you think that, you don't understand it. It is embedded in nature. The Pythagorean theorem existed before Earth existed, and it will still exist after Earth no longer exists, because it's embedded in the fabric of this universe.
So I'm
There's no getting away from it.
I mean, effectively, we're referring to this as their fundamental laws that cannot be denied, and you've managed to not only observe these, but put them down in a book with a process that enables them to be accessible to anybody.
Yes.
You know, and not just...
Now, when you say anybody, let me correct you.
Well,
accessible to anybody who can read English, yeah, and wants to improve himself or others.
Well, yeah, because there was always that caveat, isn't there? If somebody's not interested in taking information and using it in a positive way, you know, nobody can help them achieve anything. You know,
yeah.
So no, that's I'm okay with that. I'm just conscious of time as well. I just wanted to finish because obviously I'd like to encourage everyone to explore this, because as somebody that values personal development and the observation of some of my greatest breaks in like personal development was when I was understood the motivations behind particular patterns that were self-sabotaging, and you'd be like, oh right, that's why I do that. Right. And I wouldn't know them without reading the scales, which one applies to which. Just that I've seen examples in my own life where something was pointed out to me, and it's like, oh, you realise every time that was presented to you, you behaved in a particular way, and it was like,
right.
So kind of, I know that there's principles that affect all of us, and if you don't see them and you don't know where you are on them. And the best example I can give, and I wouldn't know where this is on the scale or what scale it would be on, but a few years ago when I trained to become a hypnotherapist, the guy that was teaching me hypnotherapy, Vinny Shawman, is brilliant at reading facial expressions, etc. As you would expect him to be. He's been a hypnotherapist for a long, long time and knows how to read body language. And I can't even remember what we were doing, but it was like a big group thing, and Vinny was giving his feedback to everybody, one at a time as he went around the room. And as he gave it to me, he finished what he was saying, and there must have been an expression or something on my face, because I kind of was like taking it. I thought I was taking it on board, and he stepped back in, looked at me, and said, It's feedback, not criticism. And when he hit me with that, I had this realization that throughout my child life and adult life, when I had done something and people had spoken to me, I'd taken it as criticism, not feedback. I'd always taken it in this negative way and gone down a negative route with it. And it was that little split second of somebody recognizing something in me, of years of observing people. And he was just like, he just straight away said, stop that. It's feedback, not criticism. And I've always admired his ability to just, whatever it was that he saw in me, like you were saying, when you learn to read people, and he could just see that I had gone in the wrong direction. And and from that observation that he made, I was literally able to look back at my life and see exactly where I had turned left every single time in a similar situation, when people were probably trying to help me. But I was always going, well, they've obviously got a problem with me. They've got an issue with me. Screw you, criticising me. I'm doing my best, sort of thing. And I always took that same direction, that turn in every time. And it really opened me up to recognising these patterns and how I was repeating them.
Right.
So...
Right.
So yeah, and so I'd love it for people to kind of embrace the thinking behind this, because it's something I've experienced in, I've articulated it differently, but I think someone like yourself would see that on a scale and say, right, and I'd be able to look at that and say, right, this is what I've done every single time, and this is why I've done it.
Right.
And then there's like you say, with those scales, there's an explanation as to why you do it and what you can do to move up. So
right, because you have to understand. Every time you find a level, whether it's of yourself or another, you have an insight. You're a little smarter.
Yeah.
So this whole system is a fruitful source of insight. The more you use it, the smarter you get. So if you start with scale number 1 and you find your level there, you have an insight. Then when you go to scale number 2, you're a little bit smarter, and you bring that with you to scale number 2. And you have a realization on that when you go to scale number 3, and you bring those realizations with you to scale number. So what I tell everybody, the way to use this book, okay, to make it worth $1 billion to you, is like this. Study it the way you study a textbook.
Yeah. A
physics text, a geometry text, an economics text, a biology text. You start on line 1 and you study it. You make sure you understand that line, and you do not go on until you do. Okay, and you go through stepwise. I was very careful to construct it, so if you go through stepwise, you'll get it. Everything is in there, right? And when you get to the end of the book, you now understand the subject. Then go back to the beginning, read it again, and now find your level on every scale. And by the time you finish that second reading, you'll be an entirely different person.
And
you'll be an insightful person.
And that's the perfect place to stop. Jim, thank you very much for your time. I've really enjoyed this. And the hour has literally flown by. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
And that was Jim. And I have ordered the book. I am going to, Jim and I, a little bit after we stopped recording, have talked about Jim coming back on a session and to talk about those scales. It's something I'm going to look forward to. Hopefully we'll be able to get the first one out by around December. Who knows? But obviously I will let you know. I will tell you all about it. And as always, for everybody that's listening, supporting, sharing and liking, subscribing, I hope you enjoy the podcast. I hope you enjoy all of the episodes. And please, whatever you believe, wherever you are from, take care and be blessed. Thank you very much.